The fluorescent lights in Dr. Patterson's office hummed with the kind of sterile efficiency that makes bad news feel even worse. I sat in the vinyl chair, staring at the diplomas on his wall while he shuffled through my test results with the practiced detachment of a man who'd delivered this particular brand of devastation countless times before. The doctor's voice carried that careful professional tone doctors use when they're about to destroy your world. Mr. Chen, I'm afraid the results are conclusive. You have a condition called non-obstructive azoospermia. Simply put, you don't produce sperm. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of corporate boardrooms had taught me never to show weakness, even when the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. Is it treatable? I asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. Dr. Patterson leaned forward slightly, probably mistaking my calm for shock. In your case, no. The condition is permanent. The damage to your seminiferous tubules is irreversible. I know this is difficult to process, but there are options. Sperm donation, adoption. I stopped listening. For 2 years, Sarah and I had been trying to have children. 2 years of fertility specialists, ovulation tracking, and increasingly desperate attempts at conception. 2 years of watching my wife's face fall month after month when her period arrived. 2 years of her subtle suggestions that maybe the problem wasn't with her. The irony was bitter. I'd always assumed, hell, we'd both assumed, that if anyone was broken, it was her. She was the one with irregular cycles, the one who'd had problems in college. I'd been the picture of health, the successful businessman who ran marathons and maintained a disciplined lifestyle. I cut through his explanation about hormone therapy options. How long have I had this condition? It's likely congenital. You've probably had it your entire adult life. Congenital. The word echoed in my mind as I drove home through the Seattle traffic. I'd never been able to father children. Not now, not ever. The knowledge settled over me like a cold weight, not crushing but clarifying. There was something almost liberating about finally knowing the truth. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a moment, watching the house Sarah and I had bought 3 years ago. The house where we'd planned to raise our family. The house where she'd been living a lie for months. Because if I couldn't father children, then the pregnancy test she'd hidden in her gym bag last week, the one I'd accidentally seen when looking for her water bottle, was impossible. The phone calls she'd been taking in the other room, the new clothes, the sudden interest in yoga and self-care. The way she'd been checking her phone constantly, smiling at texts she never used to get. I'd noticed these things with the vague suspicion of a busy husband, filing them away as curious, but not alarming. Now they took on a different meaning entirely. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked in, wearing the navy dress I'd bought her for her birthday. She looked up from her laptop with the kind of smile that used to make my day, but now felt like a performance. "How was your doctor's appointment?" she asked, closing the laptop a little too quickly. "Fine," I said, hanging up my jacket. "Just a routine checkup." She nodded, already turning back to whatever she'd been doing. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at it with the kind of automatic response that spoke of anticipation. Sarah's voice carried a brightness that hadn't been there in months. "I'm thinking of making that salmon recipe tonight, the one with the lemon and herbs. We should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" I asked. "I don't know. Just life. We don't celebrate enough." She was practically glowing, and I realized with perfect clarity that she was getting ready to tell me something. Something she thought was wonderful news. I kissed her forehead, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, something expensive and new. "That sounds perfect. I'll open a bottle of wine." As I walked to the wine cellar, I found myself calculating timelines. The pregnancy test had been 3 weeks ago. Her new gym membership was 6 months old. The phone calls had started around the same time. I selected a bottle of Pinot Noir, one of the good ones we'd been saving for a special occasion. Tonight seemed appropriate. After all, we were about to celebrate a miracle. The candles flickered between us as Sarah poured herself water instead of wine. She'd been fidgeting through dinner, barely touching her salmon, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement. I watched her with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. "You're not drinking," I observed, gesturing toward her untouched glass. Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her stomach. I'm trying to be healthier. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Here it comes, I thought, taking a sip of wine. The performance I'd been waiting for. Sarah reached across the table to take my hand. Her fingers were trembling slightly. "Michael, I have something incredible to tell you." I set down my wine glass and gave her my full attention, arranging my features into the expression of a loving husband who had no idea what was coming. Sarah whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I felt something cold and mechanical click into place in my chest, the same feeling I got when closing a particularly difficult business deal. Everything became crystal clear. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated to convey shock and hope. Sarah was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "I took 3 tests. They were all positive. I know we've been trying for so long, and I was starting to think maybe it would never happen. But it did. It's our miracle, Michael. Our miracle." Our miracle. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I reached across the table and wiped the tears from her cheeks, marveling at how naturally the gesture came. "I can't believe it," I said, and it was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said all evening. She laughed, a sound of pure joy that might have broken my heart if I'd still had one. "I know. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream. But it's real. We're really going to be parents." I stood up and pulled her into my arms, feeling her body shake with emotion against mine. Over her shoulder, I could see our reflection in the kitchen window, the perfect picture of a couple receiving the best news of their lives. "When?" I asked, my lips against her hair. "The doctor thinks I'm about 8 weeks along. The baby should be born in early April." 8 weeks. I did the math automatically. That would put conception around mid-November, right around the time she'd started those extra sessions with her personal trainer. The same trainer who'd been texting her at odd hours, whose name was Alex, and who she'd mentioned with just a little too much enthusiasm. Sarah whispered against my chest. "I love you." "I love you too," I replied, and even as the words left my mouth, I realized they were no longer true. What I felt now was something else entirely, a cold, calculating interest in watching her performance unfold. I pulled back to look at her face, memorizing the expression of complete happiness. She had no idea that I knew about her gym bag, about the pregnancy test, about the impossibility of what she was claiming. She believed she was fooling me completely. Sarah wiped her eyes. "I need to call my mother, and your parents. God, everyone's going to be so happy." "Let's wait a little," I said, "just until we see the doctor. Make sure everything's okay." She nodded, understanding. "You're right. We should be careful. But Michael, I just have this feeling that everything's going to be perfect. Like we've been through the hard part, and now we get our reward." I kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of her tears. "I'm going to take a shower. Let this all sink in." In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, calm, focused, and utterly without mercy. The loving husband who'd sat down to dinner was gone, replaced by something harder and more purposeful. I turned on the shower and let the water run while I thought through my options. I could confront her now, demand the truth, blow up her carefully constructed lie. But that would give her time to prepare, to craft explanations, to potentially salvage something from the wreckage. Number better, to let her dig herself deeper. Let her commit fully to the deception. Let her involve families and friends. Let her build a house of cards so elaborate that its collapse would be absolutely devastating. I had resources, money, connections, a law firm that specialized in protecting the interests of wealthy clients. Most importantly, I had the prenup she'd signed 3 years ago, the one that made her infidelity grounds for terminating alimony. When I returned to the bedroom, Sarah was lying on her side, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. She looked up at me with such genuine happiness that for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. "I can't believe we're finally going to have a family," she said softly. "Neither can I," I replied, getting into bed beside her. "It's going to change everything." She curled against me, and I held her while she drifted off to sleep, probably dreaming about the future she thought we were going to have. I stayed awake much longer, planning for the future we were actually going to have. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. But tonight, I would let her sleep peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of her own deception. The private investigator's office was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of the noir film stereotype of a dingy room with Venetian blinds, Marcus Webb operated out of a sleek downtown Seattle high-rise. His credentials from the FBI and corporate security firms displayed prominently on mahogany walls. "I need to know everything about my wife's activities over the past 6 months," I told him, sliding a photograph of Sarah across his desk, particularly anything involving her gym membership and personal trainer. Webb studied the photo with professional interest. He was a compact man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of uncovering people's secrets. Webb's tone suggested he already knew the answer. Suspected infidelity? "Among other things," I replied. He quoted me a retainer fee that would have made most people wince. I wrote the check without hesitation. "How long will this take?" 3 weeks for a preliminary report. 6 weeks for a comprehensive investigation with documentation suitable for legal proceedings. "I need the comprehensive version," I replied. Over the following days, I fell into a strange double life. During the day, I played the part of the expectant father with Academy Award-worthy precision. I researched cribs and strollers, discussed baby names with Sarah, and even suggested we start looking at larger houses. I accepted congratulations from colleagues who'd heard the news, shook hands with friends who bought us champagne, and endured my mother-in-law's tears of joy over video calls. The performance was surprisingly easy. Years of business negotiations had taught me how to compartmentalize emotions, how to project exactly what people wanted to see. Sarah ate it up, glowing with happiness at my enthusiasm for our miracle. But in the evenings, after she'd gone to bed, I worked on my real project. I contacted my lawyer, reviewed the prenup clause by clause, and began documenting everything. The new gym membership she'd charged to our joint account, the unexplained absences on weekends, the way she'd started doing her own laundry instead of using our housekeeper. Sarah's pregnancy symptoms conveniently aligned with the timeline she'd established. Morning sickness that sent her rushing to the bathroom, fatigue that had her napping in the afternoons, food aversions that gave her an excuse to avoid cooking. She played the part of an expectant mother with the same dedication I brought to being a supportive husband. The first report from Webb arrived via encrypted email 3 weeks later. Sarah had been meeting with Alex Morrison, her personal trainer, twice a week for the past 6 months. But the sessions weren't taking place at the gym. The photographs were damning. Sarah entering a downtown apartment building, staying for 2 to 3 hours, leaving with the disheveled appearance of someone who'd been doing more than exercising. Alex Morrison was 28 years old, recently divorced, with a lean build and the kind of casual confidence that certain women found irresistible. Webb's report included financial records showing that Sarah had been paying for the apartment, a studio in Capitol Hill that she'd rented under her maiden name. Hotel receipts from weekends when she'd claimed to be visiting her sister in Portland. Text message logs that painted a picture of a woman desperately in love with a man who saw her as a convenient arrangement. The most interesting discovery was a series of messages from mid-November, right around the time of conception. Sarah had been pressuring Alex to leave his girlfriend, threatening to end their relationship if he didn't commit. His responses were increasingly cold, making it clear that he had no intention of leaving his current situation for her. That's when she'd gotten pregnant, not by accident, but by design. A desperate attempt to force his hand, to create a crisis that would compel him to choose her. When that had failed, she'd pivoted to Plan B, pass the child off as mine and secure her financial future through the marriage. The cold calculation of it was almost admirable. She'd correctly identified that I was the more stable option, the one who could provide for her and the child. Alex was fun, exciting, sexually fulfilling, but he wasn't husband material. I was the safety net she'd married for precisely this reason. Webb's second report arrived with video evidence. Sarah and Alex in the apartment, Sarah and Alex in hotel rooms, Sarah and Alex in situations that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the conception window. But the most valuable piece of evidence was a conversation Webb had recorded using directional microphones. Sarah pleading with Alex to acknowledge the pregnancy, to be part of the child's life. Alex brutally honest about his intentions to stay with his girlfriend and his suggestion that Sarah figure out another solution. That conversation had taken place 2 weeks before her miraculous announcement to me. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, Richard Steinberg, a man who'd helped me structure the prenup and who understood exactly what was at stake. His office overlooked Elliott Bay, and we sat in leather chairs discussing the destruction of my marriage with the same clinical detachment we'd once used to negotiate business contracts. Richard confirmed, reviewing the documents. The prenup is ironclad. Infidelity voids all spousal support provisions. With this level of documentation, she'll be lucky to keep her car. What about the child? I asked. Not your responsibility, legally or financially. The DNA test will confirm what we already know. I nodded, watching the ferries move across the gray water. I want to serve her the papers at the most psychologically devastating moment possible. Richard raised an eyebrow. That's unusually vindictive for you, Michael. She's not the woman I married, I said. Or maybe she is, and I was just too blind to see it. That night, Sarah announced that she'd scheduled our first ultrasound appointment. She was practically vibrating with excitement, talking about how surreal it would be to see our baby for the first time. Sarah curled up against me in bed. I've been thinking about names. If it's a boy, maybe Michael Jr., or we could name him after your father. I stroked her hair, feeling the texture of lies beneath my fingers. Let's wait until we know more about the pregnancy. Make sure everything's developing normally. She nodded, understanding. You're right. I just can't help getting excited. 2 days later, Webb delivered his final report. The investigation was complete, the evidence overwhelming, and the legal strategy clear. Sarah had been living a double life for 6 months, was pregnant with another man's child, and was attempting to commit paternity fraud on a scale that would have impressed a confidence artist. I filed for divorce that same evening, requesting an expedited hearing based on the evidence of infidelity. The papers would be served in 10 days, the morning before our scheduled ultrasound appointment. The timing wasn't coincidental. I wanted her to receive the divorce papers when she was most vulnerable, most committed to the lie she'd constructed. I wanted her to understand that her carefully planned deception had been met with an equally careful destruction. Justice, I'd learned, was a dish best served with surgical precision. The process server arrived at our house at 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before we were scheduled to leave for the ultrasound appointment. I answered the door while Sarah was upstairs getting ready, accepting the papers with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been expecting them. Sarah called from the top of the stairs. "Michael?" Who was at the door. "Just a delivery," I replied, setting the envelope on the kitchen counter. "Are you ready to go?" She appeared in the doorway moments later, dressed in a flowing blue dress that was supposed to make her look maternal. Her face was bright with anticipation, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. Sarah moved toward the coffee maker. "I barely slept last night. I keep thinking about seeing the baby for the first time. Do you think it's too early to see a heartbeat?" I watched her pour herself a cup of decaf, marveling at how committed she was to the performance. Even alone with me, she maintained the fiction, as if saying the words often enough would make them true. "Sarah," I said quietly, "you should look at this before we leave." She turned, seeing the envelope in my hands. "What is it?" "Open it," I pressed. Her smile faltered slightly as she took the papers, probably expecting some kind of insurance document or medical form. I watched her face change as she read the first page, confusion giving way to shock, then to something approaching terror. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "What is this?" "Divorce papers. I'm divorcing you for adultery." The words hit her like a physical blow. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, the papers scattering across the floor. For a long moment, she just stared at them, as if they were written in a language she didn't understand. Sarah's voice was rising. "This is insane. Michael, I'm pregnant. We're having a baby. This is some kind of mistake." The mistake was thinking you could lie to me. I pulled out a manila folder from my briefcase and set it on the table. 6 months of evidence, Sarah. Photographs, financial records, text messages, hotel receipts, Alex Morrison, the apartment on Capitol Hill, the pregnancy that's impossible because I'm permanently sterile. Her face went white. "You're... what?" "I've been infertile my entire adult life, have been since birth. I found out the day before you announced your miracle." I sat down across from her, my voice calm and measured. "So either you're carrying the second coming of Christ, or you've been f***ing your personal trainer and trying to pass his child off as mine?" She started to cry, but they weren't the tears of someone who'd been caught. They were the tears of someone whose entire world was collapsing in real time. "Michael, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 6 months? That you rented an apartment to f*** another man? That you got pregnant with his child and decided to commit paternity fraud rather than face the consequences?" Sarah sobbed. "It wasn't like that. I made a mistake. I was lonely, and you were always working, and Alex was just there, and I thought maybe if I ended it and we had a baby, everything would be okay." "So you decided to have his baby and pretend it was mine?" I asked. I thought maybe you'd never have to know. That we could be happy." The honesty was almost refreshing. No elaborate justifications, no claims of temporary insanity. Just the simple, brutal truth that she'd been willing to build our entire future on a lie. "Read the prenup provisions," I said, gesturing toward the papers. "Specifically, the section about adultery." She picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the legal language that was about to destroy her life. I watched her face as she processed the implications. No alimony, no community property, no financial support of any kind. Sarah whispered. "You planned this." "I planned for the possibility that you might betray me. You planned to betray me and cover it up with fraud." Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it automatically, and I saw Alex's name on the screen. Even now, in the middle of her life falling apart, he was still texting her. "Answer it," I said. "What?" she asked. "Answer the phone. Tell him about the divorce papers," I pressed. She stared at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You want him to know? I want you to understand what you've lost. Go ahead. Call your baby's father and tell him the good news." She picked up the phone with trembling fingers, dialing Alex's number. I could hear his voice through the speaker, casual and slightly annoyed. Alex's voice came through the speaker. "Sarah? I told you not to call me during the day." "Alex, I need to tell you something. Michael found out about us. He's divorcing me." There was a long pause. "Damn, are you sure?" "He has pictures, evidence, everything," she replied. Another pause, longer this time. "Look, Sarah, I'm sorry this happened, but we talked about this. I can't be involved in your situation." Sarah's voice cracked. "Your situation?" "Alex, I'm pregnant. This is our baby." "I never asked you to get pregnant. That was your decision," Alex answered. "But I thought," she tried to reply but was cut. "You thought wrong. I'm with Jennifer now. We're engaged. I can't have this kind of drama in my life." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her face a mask of devastation. In the space of 10 minutes, she'd lost her husband, her financial security, and her lover. The perfect storm of consequences for her perfectly planned deception. "He's not coming to save you," I said quietly. "There's no happy ending here, Sarah. No last-minute rescue. Just the consequences of your choices." She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married 3 years ago. Vulnerable, desperate, and completely out of her depth. Sarah whispered, "What am I supposed to do?" "That's not my problem anymore." I stood up and walked to the door, pausing only to look back at her one last time. She was hunched over the table, surrounded by the debris of her lies, crying with the hopeless intensity of someone who'd finally understood the price of her betrayal. "The locks will be changed by this afternoon," I said. "Your personal belongings will be boxed and delivered to whatever address you provide. Everything else stays here." I left her there, sitting in the wreckage of the life she'd tried to steal, and walked out into the morning sun. The ultrasound appointment was in 20 minutes, but I had somewhere else to be. I had a life to rebuild, and it was going to be infinitely better than the one I'd lost. 6 months later, I was having coffee in a downtown Seattle cafe when I saw her. Sarah was sitting at a corner table looking tired and worn in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Her hair was shorter, cheaper, and she wore the kind of clothes that spoke of limited budgets and practical choices. She was 6 months pregnant now, showing clearly, her hands resting on her swollen belly as she stared out the window. There was no sign of Alex Morrison. According to my lawyer, he'd married his girlfriend and moved to Portland shortly after the divorce proceedings began. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but mild curiosity. She looked older, harder, like someone who'd learned difficult lessons about the price of deception. The woman who'd sat across from me at dinner, glowing with happiness about our miracle, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that actions have consequences, that lies have expiration dates, and that some betrayals are unforgivable. She hadn't seen me, and I made no effort to get her attention. We had nothing left to say to each other. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, swift and brutal in its completeness. She'd kept her car and her personal belongings. I'd kept everything else. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, the patent attorney I'd been seeing for the past 2 months. She was intelligent, successful, and refreshingly direct about her intentions. We were having dinner that night and she was cooking, something Sarah had rarely done in the final months of our marriage. I finished my coffee and stood to leave, glancing once more at the woman who'd tried to steal my future. She was alone, as she deserved to be, counting the cost of her choices in the currency of isolation and regret. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the man I'd become. The loving husband who'd believed in miracles was gone, replaced by someone harder and more discerning, someone who understood that trust was a luxury, that love was a vulnerability, and that the most important lesson life could teach was how to protect yourself from those who would use your affection against you. Sarah had destroyed 2 lives with her deception, but she'd failed to destroy mine. In the end, that was the only victory that mattered. I drove home through the afternoon traffic, already planning the evening ahead. Jennifer would be there in 2 hours, and we'd talk about her work, my work, the future we might build together. A future built on honesty, transparency, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving betrayal. The past was behind me, buried beneath the weight of consequences and the satisfaction of justice served. The future was ahead, bright with possibility and free from the burden of loving someone who'd never deserved it. I'd learned to live without miracles. It was a much better way to live. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.